Hi guys, just wanted to remind you that Kevin does have his own YouTube channel. He forgot to mention it in the video and the interview that you're gonna see here in a minute. So please check out Kevin's YouTube channel. It's called Kevin Sound Mixer. I'll be adding a link there in the description. So thanks for watching. Enjoy the interview. Bye. Hello, buddy. Welcome back to the channel. I've got my good friend Kevin here, and Kevin was on my show. What about 6 months ago or
about
longer?
September, I think, last year.
Yeah, so a while ago. Unfortunately, we had some technical issues, but that's all sorted out today. So just a little bit of background, Kevin. Can you tell everybody what you do? You've got a really cool job. I think you've got a very cool profession.
I do, yeah. I'm grateful to be working in film and television when I'm back in the States. And I do the production sound for television shows, movies, and some of them may be even ones that you might have seen. They might be on Netflix or Amazon or even in the theater. And last summer I was really excited because I had just finished a movie called The Black Phone, which is a horror movie. Mm-hmm. And it was in the theaters, and it was in here in the Philippines, so it was kind of fun to see that.
What have you been working on recently?
I haven't been very busy, which is good and bad. It gives me time to be able to go out and travel and do more things that I want to do. But I did make a movie for the Hallmark Channel between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Mm-hmm. And then I worked for a while before that. I think it was in October. I worked on a Apple TV project called Lady in the Lake. I was kind of helping out.
I've heard of that.
It hasn't come out yet, but it's going to come out. It's a big one for Apple. Just a couple weeks on that show to help out another mixer. So it's a great job.
I've been watching this series called The Last Ship, and a lot's filmed on an aircraft carrier, and I was wondering, like, how do they do the sound there where you got these loud jets going by, then you got people having a conversation too. Yeah. Like, what do you do when you've got like something really loud as part of the scene, and you've also got dialogue too? How do you mix those two together?
I think there's only two things that can happen. One is you're able to control that background sound enough that the conversation isn't lost, or you've got to dub it again later.
Oh, I see.
And so they go back, and the actors go back into a recording studio after the fact, watch themselves on the screen, match their lips, and say their lines all over again. It's called
really?
Looping, or ADR, automatic dialogue replacement.
Wow.
Yeah. And it can be very tedious.
I'll bet. Wow. Yeah. So you're here in the Philippines, and how long are you going to be here for?
You know, I got here in January this trip, and unfortunately I'm leaving again soon. I'm leaving this coming weekend. So it was kind of a short 2-month visit, but I realized that spring is coming. It's kind of around the corner, and it's really the best time for me to go back and prepare to be ready to work again. So I'm really hoping, fingers crossed, that I'm going to pick up a job, significant job here. But of course I love the Philippines very much, and I love to be here as much as I can. And you might remember from our last interview, I grew up here and I speak a little bit of Tagalog and stuff. So it's where my heart is. It's where I want to be.
So you were born in the Philippines, right?
I wasn't born. I came here at age 6.
Oh, that's right. You came here at age 6. Because your father was in the military, is that right?
Missionaries.
Missionaries, okay.
Mom and Dad were missionaries here in the 1980s, and I left after I graduated from high school in the mid-90s.
So that's a long time, yeah.
Right. But now I'm building a new chapter. That's what it feels like. I had the part of my life where I was kind of a kid and a young person, and now I'm coming back and building a new history where now I'm grown up. It's kind of cool. It's kind of different.
And so you have a girlfriend here and everything, and so do you see yourself someday living in the Philippines? Someday you would take your girlfriend back to America, or what are your plans?
I would love to stay here. I love the people, the culture, the way of life, and all the things that you've discussed many times in your videos, how our stress levels have gone down, and how we love being here. You're here by the ocean. We can hear the waves in the background. And the dream is to be able to have a place here and stay and go back and forth, and so I see that happening for me. I would love that. And I busy myself with really fun, exciting things. I go diving here. I explore the World War II history, which we'll get into, and there's just so many fun things to do here that make it additionally worth it, not just the cost of living and the sense of peace and everything, but the fun things.
If you're an adventurous person, there's some cool stuff to do in the Philippines.
Yeah, for sure.
Real quick, one more thing on your job. Like, how does it work with like getting these different gigs? Like, do you have an agent, or how do you get a job? Like, how do you find out about somebody's available, and how do you get that particular position?
I'm completely freelance, which is kind of a little bit scary because it's up to me to try to determine or figure out what kind of job I'm going to get. And I do that through networking. I make friends, I talk to people, I email, I ask for introductions. And basically what you hope to do is build relationships over time. So for example, I might work with the same producer of a television show again and again, and we form a rapport and a friendship, and they go, hey, I'm coming back to Savannah, are you available? You know. So in my mind, I always think of like kind of like a little pyramid hierarchy, and at the very bottom is everything from cold calls to trying to beg to get a meeting with someone, nobody knows you, and as you work your way up, you finally get to the top of that pyramid where they're calling you and saying, hey, are you available? There's no more resume sending, there's no more begging, you know. But right now, what I do is a little bit of an email campaign. I might email a dozen people that I know that say, hey, just want to let you know I'm available, I'd love to work. And then hopefully one of those will respond and I'll get some work. So.
Yeah, when I was a production stage manager and artistic director back in the 80s, there was a newspaper that you could buy at certain bookstores. I think it was called Backstage. And in there they had all these jobs, like for acting, for TV, for movies, and I used to go through there looking for stage manager jobs and stuff.
Because crew positions were in there as well, right?
Everything,
awesome.
yeah. They had a special section for that.
Well, now also, thankfully, because I'm a member of our IATSE union, we get emails every once in a while about rumors of work and things like that, and they may sometimes drop an email link to say, hey, you know, send your resume to these guys. So they can kind of help sometimes find. They're not a hiring hall, or they're not supposed to find you work, but they can aid in connecting you with people that can work.
Back in New Mexico, I had an agent, and he was IATSE, and he got me a couple jobs, like running Spotlight for Prince, and doing Black Sabbath, things like that. It's like helping set up concerts and things,
That's great.
But it's hard to get into IATSE, it's not that easy.
I made a whole video about how to join IATSE because so many people want to know, because it's kind of like this mystery enigma to them, like how does that happen? So, but once you find out what the path is, the journey that you need to take, you just go after your goals and just pursue it. So,
it's best to find like a mentor that's already in that can help you get in there.
Yeah, that's right. I had mentors too.
And so we were talking about history off channel there, and you had a really cool story to tell. So just tell us a little bit about what you found and all about this, because it's a great story.
Okay. I love exploring when I'm here in the Philippines, anything related to World War II history, because even when I was here as a little kid in Batangas, one of the first activities that we did was my mom and dad took me and my sister up a mountain, and we poked around on a World War II battle site. There was like foxholes and bomb craters, and we were like, hey kids, this is where a battle took place. Like, isn't this amazing? So it was instilled in me as a young man, a young kid, that history is kind of interesting because it's right here in front of us.
Right.
Maybe someone in the States might have had that similar situation if they grew up near like a Civil War battlefield or something like that. So I've always been visiting a favorite island of mine in Manila Bay called Corregidor Island, and it's kind of famous. During the Second World War, MacArthur and all of the Americans and Filipinos were fighting a battle, and they started in Bataan and they worked their way down. Unfortunately, the Japanese beat them down, and then finally they were just on Corregidor Island itself, and they eventually had to surrender. So it's just a favorite place for me to go back and hike and explore, and I have a group of friends that I visit with who are, one's an author, his name is Paul Whitman. There's a couple other gentlemen who are just experts on the island. Some of them have visited the island 60 or 70 times, and they know seemingly every square inch of it. But recently I went on another trip there, and this was just 2 weeks ago, and I was exploring around in a tunnel. It was a hand-dug tunnel in the side of a hill. And
was that dug by the Japanese or by the Filipinos? Or?
I think it was by the Americans or the Filipinos. This is just my theory, but there was, as you know, different people were defending or occupying it or attacking it, depending on what time of the war it was. So I think we're looking at a tunnel that was built in about 1941-42 to defend against that Japanese attack. And then, of course, later, once the island fell, the Japanese would have occupied that same tunnel and used it. But on the floor of that tunnel was a dog tag, which is a slang term for an identification tag. An identification tag or dog tag is what a soldier would wear around their neck and identifies their name, maybe something information about them, where they're from, their blood type, something like that. And this one stood out to me right away, and this is the back of it. If I put it up near the camera, will they see it? Will it focus on it? So that's the back of it where you can read the letters a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And what was neat was I was able to find a serial number that was legible and the name was Daniel W. Crowley. And so of course now we have Google. I went straight to Google and I found out a fascinating story, which is Daniel Crowley not only was on Corregidor and Bataan, but he was a captured prisoner of war. And he actually survived the war after many harrowing experiences, including being put on horrible work details by the Japanese, being put on a Japanese hell ship, they called it, and being sent to Japan. And he was working in a...
wow, he was sent to Japan.
Yeah, he went all the way to... He survived work details on Corregidor and Palawan, where they were made to build a runway with hand tools, no digging, no equipment. And then he wanted to get out of there, and so they sent him to a prisoner of war camp, and then that eventually sent him to Japan. And he worked as a copper miner in Japan until he was liberated
yeah, there were Japanese did some horrible things, you know, to prisoners, especially to the Chinese. Like it was the rape of Nanking. Horrible, horrible stuff that was done, you know. So he was lucky he survived.
It's almost unforgivable, and I know we're 80 years later and everything's changed, and I think Japan is an ally of the Philippines, but gosh, it's hard to look back at some of the atrocities that happened and think, you know, how is that ever forgivable? But what's neat about Dan is because he survived, he only passed away last year at the age of 99.
Wow, just missed him.
Yeah, I know,
Jeez.
I just missed him. I would have loved to have met him, but one of the things that I feel like he talks about is that, you know, he had a lot of obviously anger and always wanted revenge, but he kind of laughs about it now when you look at the interviews, because they'll say, did you ever get your revenge? He goes, I never did, you know, and he had such a good spirit and a sense of peace and about it that I was amazed after living through all of that. But there's one other neat thing about the tag that I wanted to talk about, and that is it looks like it was kind of bent in half. I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but there's a big dent mark on it. And when I found it, I thought, you know, that may not be by accident, because a lot of those guys who wanted to stay and defend did not surrender personally. They were surrendered by their commanding officers. And so Paul Whitman tells me that it was not uncommon for guys to take their tag off in anger and throw it down on the ground. Because they were like, hey, I want to fight. You know, maybe this is going to be my Alamo. Like, we're going to have our last stand here. And so I wish I could have asked him, but I wanted to ask Dan, did you bend this in half? Because it looks like he took it and went, just threw it on the ground.
Maybe they thought it'd be worse being captured than dying.
Or that, yeah, that too. I don't know.
Better off to die in battle.
What were the rules? Were you supposed to identify yourself, or were you maybe supposed to give the enemy as least amount of information as possible? I'm not sure.
I know the Japanese said they would rather die than be, you know, captured. But
right, that's completely different.
Yeah,
the Japanese had their Bushido code, and surrendering was considered shameful.
Right, right.
So completely opposite from the Americans. But anyway, the Americans, many of them were upset at surrendering, and they wanted to fight. And I think maybe, it's my theory, I can't prove it, but maybe Dan was upset about being surrendered a second time, because he was surrendered on Bataan. I forgot, I left this part out. And instead of surrendering and leaving with the Japanese, he swam across to Corregidor.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's like a 3 mile long channel.
Wow.
I think at one point in his interview, he said he hitched a ride on like a rowboat that had been set adrift from a wreck or whatever. So he had a little bit of help, but basically swam across, and we're talking shark-infested waters, you know, 3 miles across from Bataan to the...
Right,
anyway,
currents and everything,
just amazing story.
So you were able to find some interviews of him that was done by what, news organizations or something? They were on YouTube, or
there's a couple interviews with him, and maybe we can put a link on this video to one of them, because he's just a fascinating guy. And one of them was over an hour long, so it was absolutely a delight to watch that one. And because of YouTube and those interviews, I was able to reach out and find someone connected me with Dan's widow, who is still living. She's 40 years younger than he was, so she's probably in her 50s now, and still living, and was delighted to find out that I had his tag. So it's going to be my honor and pleasure to return that tag to Dan's family.
How cool is that?
As soon as I get back to the States,
Isn't it something that for almost 70 years it laid there, and all these people, lots of people in that tunnel, and nobody saw it.
Probably.
And one day you walked in there, and you're the guy that found it.
And Paul Whitman tells me, he was being a little bit dramatic, but he said, I think that tag found you. And I said, well, I don't know.
Yeah, because a lot of people just bought it, stuck it in their pocket, and put it in the drawer someplace and forgot about it. Right. But you know, you've actually find out who owned the tag, and you're going to give it back to his widow. So you were the perfect person to find it.
I hope so. Maybe, yeah. And another thing is, I have a lot of respect for the history. I'm not a treasure hunter. I'm not a relic collector. In fact, I used to have some relics that I had found on Corregidor when I was like a teenager, and actually donated those items to a museum in Bamban, Tarlac, and now everyone can see them. You know, and but when you find something like a dog tag, that's a very personal item.
Very personal.
And it's something that you don't want to just cast aside, or like you said, leave in a drawer. So
I really think he must have purposely ripped it off, because it was a pretty strong chain those were on. You know, it doesn't accidentally fall off.
And the bend in the middle kind of tells a story too. Like, you know, maybe he was angry. You could feel the frustration. Because imagine if you never really got to have your shot at fighting back, because there was different parts of the island, and the tail section of the island, it's shaped like a tadpole. There's a head and a tail, and the tail is where all the Japanese were attacked. They landed in boats, and we believe that Dan was stationed up in this tunnel and never really got to encounter the Japanese. In fact, his widow said he never really got to fire a shot. So he was probably frustrated, because he was like, hey, I'm ready to go. Let's fight, you know. And then Wainwright, his commanding officer, or in charge of the whole island, surrendered everybody en masse a second time.
Wow.
So,
wow.
yeah.
Fascinating stuff. So one thing I was going to ask you before, when I interviewed you and didn't get a chance to, is like, you know, you're still a young guy. Do you think you'll retire at 62, or you think you'll keep on working? You got such a cool job, or do you have plans for the future as far as like your career and stuff, or things you would like to accomplish? Or
I've got my goal to retire here, and hopefully early. I'm not going to wait until I'm old enough to collect my pension, because I feel like there's a lot of time that I could enjoy, you know, what's left of my youth and strength. And what's great is, if we keep ourselves healthy, we can do a lot of stuff up until you're 80 years old. And one of the guys that we were hiking with on Corregidor was 81. I think he turned 81 this month.
Wow.
So, and I can hardly keep up with him. So I would love to think that I could be here and enjoy life and not have to wait until I'm in my 60s. But yeah, the goal is to try to work and save up enough money so that I could maybe retire in like 5 years. I would love to be done in my 50s.
How old are you now?
45.
There you go.
Yeah, I'll turn 46 this summer. So.
Well, being a young guy, like, you know, what's the toughest thing you've had to go through, like, you know, in your whole life, the biggest challenge you had to overcome when you look back in your life and say, that was pretty tough, how did I get through that, and it really changed me?
Ooh, that's a deep question. Maybe, honestly, just because we're on the topic of the Philippines, transitioning from being a kid and a young man who grew up in the Philippines and then having to go back to the US, that was a real big reverse culture shock for me. And I was 18, I think I turned 19 that summer, and I went from the Philippines to snowy Chicago. Ooh. And I mean, I didn't even have a scarf or gloves. I just wasn't ready. And for me, college didn't work out. I'm a dropout. I only did 1 year of college, and I struggled that part of my life. And then I would say probably finding myself in my 20s, and then once I got to my mid 30s, that's when I discovered film and television, and thought, I think I got it now. I know what I need to do. But yeah, that was probably the toughest time, transitioning. And when
did you always have like a yearning to go back to the Philippines?
I did.
Yeah.
And I have a diary entry from when I visited in 2014. I was fortunate enough to be invited to come back with Samaritan's Purse, which is a charity organization, Christian charity organization, after Typhoon Yolanda came and wiped out a bunch of the Visayas. Yeah. We came back as a media team to interview people and interview about the recovery and how things were going. And so Samaritan's Purse bought my plane ticket, put me up in a hotel, and we were here for about 10 days. And I wrote down in my diary, I was like, I don't want to leave. I want to stay here. And I wanted to extend my ticket, but I couldn't because they paid for it. So it's like I couldn't control the ticket. But that was 2014. So even back then, I wanted to stay. And then right around the time of the pandemic hit, I was really getting ready to like jump on a plane. And then of course I couldn't because the country shut down, the world shut down. So I had to wait until last summer. So last summer I came back.
It seems like with some people, the Philippines just resonates with them and they just want to be here. And other people say, I don't really care about it. You know, I go to Thailand or wherever, you know. So, you know, it did that to me. I had no idea of no plan of ever coming here. And, you know, once I came here, it changed my life. The final question is, in your life, what's like the best thing that's ever happened to you? Like, and something that like totally changed your life. You know, you look back and say, wow, it was a real turning point in my life in a good way.
I mean, there's been many good things. I want to say...
you can list more than one.
Oh, man. It's going to sound like I'm kind of monotone, I guess, but honestly, finding my niche as a production sound mixer has been the best thing most recently, because I've been doing it for 10 years now. It was January of 2013, so I just passed the 10-year mark, and that was a big life changer. It was like a job that I could lock into, enjoy, make the most money that I've ever made, and really helped me come here. So I know you always encourage, you get to hear stories from all kinds of guys who have found their passion, their life's passion, but for me, it happened kind of late. I didn't find it in my 20s. I found it in my mid to late 30s. So that was probably the big changing moment. I think I would have been struggling financially and struggling to be able to travel and do what I love to do now if I hadn't been gotten into film. So
I was messing around with that stuff back in the 70s, like managing local rock bands and working in dinner theaters, running sound and lights. Nothing like the kind of equipment that you work with, but even back then it was starting to get complicated. They were starting to use computers on the light boards and stuff and pre-programmed in settings and things like that. When you joined, I mean, it was pretty state of the art. I mean, how did you learn this stuff, and how did you, I mean, you don't just go in and run a sound, but if you ever seen, there's all these styles and all these settings. It's just that's not treble and bass anymore. So
I often come up with an equivalent, which is whenever we fly on airplanes, if the cockpit's open and we look in there, we go, oh God, if all these buttons and knobs, and if you said, why don't you fly that? You'd be like, I can't do that. And I wonder if people look at my sound cart and think the same thing. Like, and I did have one person come up to me one time and say, do you really know what every one of those buttons does? And I said, yeah. But to answer your question, it happened slowly, it happened gradually. It was like learning about little bits of equipment in part to make up the whole, right? And so before I became a mixer who sits down at a cart, I was a boom operator for a while, and I was working for the guy who had the cart, and I was able to ask questions about how he built it, and because there actually isn't a manual. There's no manual to say, here's how to be a sound mixer and here's how to build your cart. You kind of just have to be observant and ask questions and kind of figure it out yourself. And I would almost even add that there's a little bit of what do you call it, secrecy, a tiny bit, because you don't want to just make it easy to create competition left and right? You kind of do want to hold a little bit of some of it close to your chest, because especially if you have certain techniques or ways to make your sound really good, maybe you don't necessarily want to just share that with the whole world. You'll share it with your peers probably, but yeah, no, it was just working with mentors and then going online, and then also I've always been technically inclined as a person anyway, so I could get a piece of gear, read the manual, figure it out, trial and error, figure out what works. And then I left this part out of this particular interview, but I think I mentioned in the last one, I used to work for Marriott Hotels, and I did audiovisual with them for about 13 years. So they actually trained us to do basic sound.
I see, okay.
So we understood microphones, we understood how wireless systems worked. So I had a little bit of a foundation.
You had a little foundation,
Yeah. But to someone starting out who has no idea, absolutely you could get into it. You just have to take those little pieces one at a time. How do wireless systems work? How does gain structure work? How do we keep the noise ratio correct? There's all these things, and then finally pressing that record button. And sometimes you start small and you grow up and you get better, and you can make mistakes on the smaller shows that are casual and not as serious. But then once you get to the level of professional, you've got to get it right, because you don't want to make a mistake. So.
I remember when wireless microphones came out, and I was production stage manager and artistic director of theater in Orange County, and we were using cord microphones. And I said, hey, let's get some cordless microphones, a stated thing that they can dance around better and move around the stage better. And so the producer said, yeah, sure, gave me a budget. I went and bought like the cheapest ones I could find, so we had the wireless microphones. And the show was Grease, and they're out there doing the show, but if a truck would drive by on a CB radio, it would come through, and 10-4, it would come through the whole theater, and it was. And then if they touched the microphone to the hood of the car, it would feed back, and I had so much trouble with those darn things. Cord microphones are much safer.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the word cheap, because you want to buy the nicest quality stuff. And what's great is in our industry, we've got manufacturers of products that build them for that specific purpose. It's really cool. So a wireless product is designed to be bulletproof and water resistant and tough, and they know what the frequencies are of the signal so that they don't get interference. You know, things like that.
But these were at Radio Shack, you know, and they were on sale for $9.99. So I mean, there must have been.
What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? Do you have all your own equipment then?
Yes, I own all. It took a long time to build up. Basically what I would do is every time I would get a really good job, I would reinvest by purchasing more stuff. And sometimes it was new, sometimes it was secondhand, but the goal was to come up with all the tools that I needed to be able to do that job. And now there's so much that it's in a trailer. And I take my truck, an F-150, and I tow this trailer, and it's got storage bins, and the carts are in there strapped down, and then I bring that to set, and then from there we work out of that trailer or another trailer.
So you got a lot invested in that then, huh?
I do, yeah. And which actually is kind of neat, because if I do retire someday and I'm done with that equipment, I might be able to sell it as part of my kind of retirement, and a lot of it holds its value really well. You know, like you could use a microphone that was made in the 1970s and it still sounds great today.
Yeah, they do. Like the Shure microphones are great, you know.
Yeah. It's because it's about the end result of what the sound is, not necessarily the tools to create it. I mean, obviously you want basic tools, but I don't use tape anymore, for example. I'm all digital, you know.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. You know, like on audio files, people, I mean, it's a little bit off the subject here, but say a vinyl record as opposed to a CD, as opposed to tape. Like I remember when I was in theater, we used to use tape, you know, for the live shows, and the sound was incredible.
It is, yeah.
And then CDs came out, and they had this demonstration. Put a CD in, it was a jet plane, and it'd go from the left speaker to the right speaker, and you could hear it going. So isn't that incredible? But I never thought the sound on a CD was anywhere as good as like just a cassette tape.
Yeah, you're
Am I
talking
wrong
about the
that,
difference between analog and digital. And a lot of people argue to this day that analog sounds better. It's thicker, it's fuller, it just feels more real. And they had a problem, especially I think in the 90s, late 80s to 90s, where digital sounded kind of brittle and kind of artificial.
Yeah.
And part of that is I think to do with sampling rates, which have improved greatly since then. But also, if you're mixing an album straight to CD, it's going to sound completely different than it was if you were mixing it to analog. So I think that's why when we listen to older music that was recorded in the 60s, 70s, 80s, it has that nice big fat analog sound that now is, I think, missing from digital music. But there's also tricks people do now where they'll record everything digitally and then they'll dump it down to tape to give they'll give it that analog feel, and then they'll redigitize that. There's all kinds of tricks they do.
I've been in studios a few times, again, way back in like the 70s, but didn't they record everything on a different track? Like the drums are one track, and then the guitar was another, and the vocals were another, so they could, you know, adjust everything.
It was called multi-track recording.
Yeah, yeah.
It was actually invented by Les Paul, the same guy that invented the Les Paul microphone.
Les Paul, yeah.
So he invented the first multi-track, and for the first time ever, you had beautiful mix control over the levels. Instead of back in the old days, you know, there'd be one microphone in the center of a room. You put the singer here, the drummer's way in the back, this guy's over here. And now you got control of essentially infinite tracks. Probably what you're hearing on the radio today is dozens and dozens and dozens of tracks all mixed together.
Now is tape dead? Like, does anybody use reel-to-reel tapes for anything anymore?
Not for what I do in production sound for film. It used to be that the Nagra recorders, they're called, were the de facto standard, and they were reels, and you would put them on, and they were rough and tough, and they could withstand the humidity in the jungle and all that stuff. Now we're all digital, and it's so much easier and reliable to have a card or two cards, backups, and you just hand that over, and there's no way that tape is going to get damaged because it's digital, and you can email it and send it and back it up on hard drives, and it's just so much more efficient. So, but I think analog tape may be used in some points in the process of recording sound or music in a studio, just because it sounds cool, right? Like, what if you want that artificial hiss or that kind of analog feel, but it sounds too digital? Well, put it onto tape and then redigitize it. I don't know.
Before synthesizers came out, I mean, a lot of the bands I work with, you'd use the keyboards, the organs from a church, with the Leslie.
Yes,
you know, with the big box and the thing swinging around inside of it, rotating to get that whoa sound. And
it sounded so cool. And then later, even in like the 90s, they would put vocals through that.
Yeah.
So there's a famous song by an alternative band in the 90s, and it was Black Hole Sun.
Oh, I know that song.
The guy's vocal is going through a Leslie speaker.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's spinning around. It's so cool. Yeah.
Wow. Well, anyway,
do we have time to talk about the airplane?
Lots of time. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Lots of time. Go on.
This is just shifting back to the World War II subject again, but I'm very excited to go diving tomorrow on the remains of a Japanese airplane that's at the end of the Dumagete runway. I've been hearing about this since last summer. I actually did a video about it on my channel. Supposedly, we think the airplane was being piloted by a Japanese student.
There's a training field here during the war with Japanese.
Correct. And we think that it took off and then the student maybe made a mistake and then it crashed. And I even have narrowed it down to what I think is one of 3 planes that I think it is. It's a Nakajima. They were like key airplanes, KI. So it's either a KI-27 or a KI-55 or a KI-79. And another exciting thing, which I'm announcing right now in this video to you, is that I went down to Silliman Beach, which is the beach next to the runway, and I kind of poked around and talked to some fishermen around there, and a fisherman showed me a giant machine gun that he had pulled off of the wreck.
Wow.
So it's down there, and he was nervous. He said, oh, what if it gets confiscated? And we said, don't worry, and we're not going to tell anyone you have this. But basically what happened was they had caught it with some ropes, because the wreck is very deep. It's about 45 meters. And they dragged it out of the water and dragged it onto the sand because they're probably hoping to sell it, to someone. But it's a Type 89 7.7 millimeter machine gun, and it's about yay long. And this thing looks great. Some of the levers still move.
Really?
There's broken off brass bullets still inside the, because it's a belt-fed machine gun. They had them in the wings.
Yeah.
So we're very excited to find the remains of this plane, and I think we'll be able to say, I will be the first person to video it and be able to put video on YouTube of the plane. And another friend of mine named Mark Reed is coming and he's going to take pictures. So it'll be a big deal. And I think I'd like to announce it to the city. Maybe we'll do a press release and share it with the news and things like that, because it's kind of cool. And again, it harkens back to history, which is the more time goes by, the more I think we're kind of forgetting what happened in the past.
Right.
And we need to remember our history, especially in the Philippines.
Otherwise you repeat it.
History will be repeated, to those what is the expression? Those who fail to remember history are doomed to repeat it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's so true. But the Philippines has a rich World War II history, and I want to encourage everybody, visitors, whether you're a foreigner or you're a Filipino, to remember your history of what happened here. And in the case of places like Corregidor, go visit. Go explore it. Go walking in the tunnels and go see what happened there, because we don't want to forget about that.
Well, even though this video will be out today, when you do get that video done, let me know. I'll put a link to it.
Okay,
I'll add it to it so on there so people can see it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that's it. So thank you so much for your time, and great seeing you again. And thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for subscribing, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Hi, guys.